Welcome to the Deer Society podcast. Here's your host, Brian Lemke.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Deer Society podcast. I'm Brian Lemke, joined by Mike and JJ Dukart, and special guest back in the studio, Mr. Ben Rising. We got some cool topics to talk about today. We're also going to give away a free Phase 5 pack. So if you listen to the podcast, listen for that keyword and send it to us. We'll put you in the drawing to win that Phase 5 pack. Exciting time of year. Things are happening during the season. And today we're going to be talking to Ben about woodsmanship, and not just woodsmanship from a human standpoint, but how these animals, really these deer, are using certain aspects of property. So not only what he looks for and some of the strategies that he uses in his strategies throughout the year, but what he sees from these different types of animals and how they use different parts of properties, right? So Ben, tell us a little bit for people that might not know about your background and how you kind of got into what you're doing now, not only from a hunting standpoint, but from a profession standpoint.
Well, I started, I'm in the timber business. I'm a logger by trade. Started logging when I was 16 years old. Started my own logging business when I was about 20, and then just kept on going. And that's how we've raised our family, ever since. But I was raised a trapper and a predator caller when I was young. My dad was a big predator caller and trapper. Wasn't into deer hunting at all. So that kind of came about the time I was 12 or 13 years old, is when I expressed a lot of interest in that. But I've just always been in the woods. I grew up in the country, was fortunate enough to have places to hunt and, people that we did work for, farming and stuff like that. We could hunt their property. So I literally could walk out my back door and I'd disappear, across the field, and which when I was a kid, I thought it was a big field, but it was only 12 acres.
Yeah.
But I'd disappear across that field and off into the woods across the river I'd go. And, but anyways, that's, I learned at a really young age a lot from trapping how animals use land, because my dad was big into land trapping. He did a lot of water trapping. I liked trapping coon and fox. We didn't have coyotes back then in Ohio where I was at. They're there now, but when I was a young kid, all we had was fox. And fox are very cagey, very scent oriented, just like a deer, so I had to learn to be scentless and how to set traps, wax your traps, dye your traps, use a rubber pad to put your knees on, wore gloves to set your traps. You just couldn't, just learned a lot. And at a very young age about that. So that transitioned into deer really easy for me as I started deer hunting. But just learning the habits of how animals use land and, setting traps really taught me a lot about that, how, a fox would use a field as far as, using the wind to his advantage to maybe smell prey in the field, like certain types of wind. So you'd like to set up certain sets on different gate, like say you're using a urine post set, which is where a fox would come through a gate setting in a farm field, and he'd stop and take a leak, just to mark, just kind of like a dog does. But a lot of times, if you've set your trap where the wind hits that fox at a certain place, like bam, he goes and finds your lure, or he smells that urine and he goes over there and bam, you got him. So it's kind of the same thing with deer, just looking at the lay of the land, just small contour changes or funnels or, river systems, creek systems, ditches, just anything like that is, are some of the first things that I look at on a property, trying to figure out how I feel like deer will navigate through a farm. It's like Mike talks, he's big into thinking about the communication of deer. That's the first thing he thinks about. Well, me, I'm thinking about how the farm lays, how the deer will use it, how they'll walk, what do I think they're going to be doing, where they might bed, I don't know, just different, I guess in a different sense for everybody.
Yeah, so we went out to dinner last night and just started having casual conversations, and we were talking about, business and all kinds of different stuff. And then we were talking about communication, and one of his points that came up was like, people don't, you have to, when you're calling, you're not just calling and making noise, you got to read the deer. So you got to turn him inside out. And that just struck me, you know what I mean? Because it's like, my background comes from waterfowl. Okay. So I was developing custom waterfowl reed type calls that would make noises and pitches and sounds that would match and these were giant Canada geese that I had access to that would match them. And it got to a point where when I started goose hunting, I was a poor shot. Okay. I'm deadly with a rifle, but I couldn't hit anything with a shotgun. So I had to figure out how to get them to me closer so that, I could be more efficient. So I bought this call from the store like everybody else, and I went out to the refuge and I blew it, and every head popped up in the air like, what in the world is that? And right away I knew, hey, this isn't right. So that was my turning point and my quest to listen to the exact pitches and recreate a product that would recreate those pitches. And as I did that, I learned what they were saying. And that's what, and I became a waterfowl outfitter. That's what you do. You read the birds. And so you're doing things and figuring out what they want, what they don't want, what their mindset is, what you can say to them to turn them inside out or manipulate them. And that had never been done in deer hunting. Okay. So when I developed a high level call, reed style call for deer, I went through that exact same process. Okay. Got close to the deer, listened to their pitches, listened to their tones, and figured out, what are they saying? Why are they saying that? And so my whole quest was manipulation of communication and communicating with them. And that's really what exploded this company. And the information and teaching people how to do that. So then when Ben comes, and now we're actually crossing over into behavior that has to do with the land and land management as part of this process of communicating to and manipulating deer and deer behavior. And so when he brought that up about, oh yeah, I started out as a trapper, and he gave me that same story, it just kind of like a light went on. It's like, I've never even thought about that. Never even thought about that. Because my mindset is communication, reading them, their body language. And now with JJ, he's even more so part of the manipulating behavior based on the land. But that's what we're doing. We're actually doing that to the land to try and manipulate the deer behavior, where Ben's thought process or his background comes from what they naturally want. Okay.
Or how they use the piece that's already there.
Yeah, exactly. And the crossover is crazy, and it's just opening up this whole new dimension in my brain. And anyway, I just want to pass that off to, some of the things that we're doing on our land, Jay, to manipulate behavior. And then you and Ben can go back and forth on thoughts, because we did some timber work, and, we create our, here I got one. Let's talk about bedding. What's natural bedding? And what's manufactured bedding? Because you're putting in switchgrass out at the farm. We've done hinge cutting. But what's natural bedding to you? What is it? We don't get to hunt down in Texas or Kentucky or anywhere. What's bedding in Kentucky? What's bedding in Virginia compared to what's bedding in Minnesota? Let's get on that one.
Ben, you're up.
I pass it to JJ, and he passes it back to Ben.
Well, everything, every area is different, obviously. I've never hunted Texas, so I can't speak there. But like in Ohio, and it's about anywhere. Like a lot of the time, deer look for, a little thicker cover sometimes. Sometimes it's not always. Sometimes deer that aren't getting messed with are just as comfortable bedding in open timber if they can see and hear what's coming, and they know they can bolt out of there. So like a lot of times everybody thinks you got to have all this thick timber and craziness, and a lot of times you really don't. Sometimes I think you can make a property too thick, because I've seen it in Ohio where, Russian olive and things like that have taken over areas, and literally it's like void of deer because it's too thick. The deer can't get through it. They don't like it. If they get stirred up in there, they have a hard time getting away. I've noticed, in the hill country, a lot of times the bigger bucks, and this is even on public land, are in open territory because they want to be able to see as far as they can see. They can smell coming from behind them. They want to be able to see in front of them, whether they're bedding on a bench or whatever it is that or just over the hill or on the hill. They want to be able to tell, and they'll rely on getting away from those senses more so than just being in thick cover, because a lot of times you're right on top of them in that thick cover before they even realize it if you're being really quiet, and it's a surprise game. So I just I look for things like that. Every area is different. Like I know Wisconsin and places like Michigan are a lot of swampy areas, deer bedding in them swamps or willow thickets, things like that, out on an island maybe, or a high spot, out in that red brush. Ohio, again, like my area, it's hill country, so they're bedding different spots. They can have bottom ground or they can have hill ground that they can bed in. So I just try to be a student of wherever I'm at, whether I'm in Kansas, Iowa, whatever I'm pulling into and whatever I'm hunting for that time period. I just try to think about where the deer are going to be, how they're going to use that land. If I'm setting up to do a lot of calling, like a lot of times in Kansas, that's kind of how I hunt. I'll set up to do calling sequences because I'm trying to make something happen fast, and deer in Kansas seem to be very active to calls compared to, say, like Ohio. Deer in Ohio react to a call, but not like they do in Kansas. So it's just different. I'll set up for downwind setups, trying to pull deer out of thickets. They got to expose themselves into the open to get downwind of me. They don't like to do that. So a lot of times I'll set myself up where I can get a shot before they get to a spot like that. I look for little swales, just any little thing that's different in the land. Like you just almost kind of have to it's like the saying, you see the forest for the trees. As you're standing there, you just kind of have to envision okay, if I wanted to get from here to there, how am I going to do that? Well, deer are kind of the same way. They will go through areas that are tougher than what we would think a deer would want to do. Especially in ravine country. I've seen where they'll go through ravines that I wouldn't think they would go through, but they don't prefer to do that. They're going to try to go the easiest route from some of those spots. I notice a lot like in the rut, bigger bucks will run the side hill, checking all those trails going up to the tops, to the bedding areas. They'll run straight along the bench and they'll just check all those doe trails instead of getting up on the ridge and walking that whole ridge. They'll stay mid-hill. They can decide whether to go to the bottom or the top by whatever that track tells them. It's really hard to explain some of these things to people because, it's some people get it, some don't. It's just like anything. It's just like, I don't get computers. You could sit there and talk to me about how to edit on that computer for 3 weeks, and I probably still wouldn't get it by the end of it. And I feel like it can be the same way with some things just come easy for people, and like woodsmanship, there's certain hunters out there that it just comes easy to. They can read, the land, they can read the deer, they understand it.
Yeah, we talked about that too because we were talking about business, in fact, and then you were talking about, you and your business and whatever. I'd love to get information from you or whatever it was we were talking about. But, your brain has to be wired a certain way to go out and invent a product and get a patent. Not everybody's wired that way. That doesn't mean I'm intelligent. That just means that that's the way I'm wired. If you look at my scholarship, you would think that I'm a flunky. I should be digging ditches, but I got 4 patents and built this, some pretty successful businesses. But that's because my brain is wired that way, not because I was taught that way. Now, I learned, and I absorb information differently. We talked about JJ, how he absorbs, he has to process it, but he's got that artistic creativity. So that personal behavior has something to do with the way you're seeing things. And then you got people like my wife who, graduated with, cum laude, whatever, in math and computer science. That's an intelligence I can't even understand. But it's a different type of, personality. And so that's why I like to give out information in base, because I coached for 20 years, you know what I mean? And so when we're in Ben, you're a lot like me. We talked about that too. we're kind of wired the same way. So I like to give out that information almost at an elementary level. I feel it's elementary because to me, I take it for granted that you should know this. Well, no, not if you're not wired the way I'm wired. You're not going to know that. Not if you don't have the experiences I've had, you're not going to know that. So when we're talking about this kind of stuff, I think it's just very helpful for everybody. And I kind of went off on a rant there, but we better lead it back to a different direction here, JJ.
I'll bring it back around. Let's just point towards late October. We were talking earlier a little bit about this topic, seeking phase, bucks using terrain. So I'm going to throw it to Ben again. Leverage Ben's expertise. What are like some top things you look for late October, seeking phase, maybe it's early November, when bucks are out searching? What are the terrain features, topographic elements that you're looking for that a buck is going to pass through that you can ambush like an unsure buck on?
One of the spots I really like is I like to find connecting timber. Like if you're looking at an aerial view and you're looking at your maps and you can see like an area where maybe two big chunks of timber kind of connect. Like it might be open and open and open, and then you got two blocks and there's something connecting them. It could be a ditch, it could be a tree line, it could be, a skinnier section of woods that's just making these connections. And they may not even touch exactly, but deer from this block are going to be going to that block.
And how are they going to get there?
And how they're going to get there. So you're just trying to kind of put yourself in the best position to where, okay, if I see one cross and he's not right where I'm at, I can call to him. Or things like that.
Good one.
In the timber, like if it's an all wooded property, a lot of times I'm looking for those saddles, or I'm looking for major connection points where I've got different finger ridges or, hogbacks all connecting where they dump off into a bottom, or where they all climb and they may converge on a ridge. So like it makes a spider's back. You got like all the spider legs, but up here's the high spot where a lot of times you'll get that crossover effect up there. You can sit up there, and I got a spot like that in Iowa on public land, and you literally can sit there from daylight to dark and you can see bucks every hour.
Yeah.
It just, and
So how do you get there and how do you play a wind?
well, you just have to get in there. Sometimes it's you
tough.
Just gotta go. You just have to take your chances, think you're taking the best route. And sometimes we overthink things, and you just got to get in there and do it. I think. And you try to use the best access you can, but sometimes if you don't know it, you just got to make mistakes. Then just learn.
Just get in there. I mean, we hunted that, Jay. That's where you cut your teeth on that exact scenario. We hunted a ridge, and back in the day, I heard from some old hunter, yeah, you got to hunt the east edge of the east-west ridge or whatever. It was something like that, but an east-west ridge was basically is what we're talking about. Because them deer will hit it whether they're down below, halfway down the hill, or coming up to the top at that spider like he talked about. The activity is crazy up there. And every single time we would bump deer getting into the stand, just about. Mm-hmm. But it didn't affect the hunt. So that's just to your point, Ben.
Yeah, it's just, and a lot of times it's like, I'm trying to think about doe bedding areas, like where doe's going to be feeding at night. Like when you start getting towards that rut phase, a lot of the does don't want to be in the open. They hate to get pestered by the bucks. The bucks are wanting to pester them. So a lot of times your food plots go dormant at that point. Like the does just do not want to be out there because they know every buck is looking for them. And so you start thinking of like, they've still got to eat and they're still going to drink water and do those things. So you kind of have to start thinking, well, how are they going to do that and where are they going to be? Like, are they going to be eating on acorns? Are they eating, on honey locust pods? Are they eating, persimmons? If you've got an area that has those and like an old apple orchard or something, like they still have to eat and do their thing. They're still going to go to those fields, but a lot of times at night, and so I try to think about how are those bucks going to get to those does or two or three. If you can circle out on your map, I know doe's bed here, I know doe's bed here, and I know doe's bed over here. And you try to figure out like, okay, here's a hub. This could be a spot where all these deer are going to cross getting to and from. Find those scrapes in between. Usually during the actual rut, the scrapes go dry.
Yeah.
They're not hitting them. They're past that, but they'll come back to that after the rut main breeding is over and the does start dwindling off, then bucks start going back to those scrapes. When you start seeing those scrapes come back into play, like November 13th, 14th, 15th, they can be deadly. And that'll tell you this phase of the rut too. Like it'll tell you that, okay, it's getting down to the gritty now. You know, bucks they're getting hungry again for does because they can't find them, so they're working the scrapes. So those are spots I look for. I look for those bottom connections. I love creek crossings. Like if you've got, it's one way to really scout a property really fast is get in, find the ditch or a creek that runs through the middle of a property and just walk that sucker. And you'll find the heaviest trails crossing that. Like that is a speed scouting tip that I can give everybody. Like you walk that creek that runs through a property, you are going to find where the heaviest sign leads to eventually. You know, especially if you want to hang a camera in a spot like that, and it'll tell you what's in there eventually.
Then you just set up on, like, say, if it's an open area, you would set up on the timber on the most favorable wind side for that particular stand and hunt that strategy then?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and a lot of times you can walk the bank of the creek to get to that stand and pop right out, and I hunt right there at the crossings a lot, you know. And sometimes that's just a scouting method. Like, I'm going to hang, hunt, and scout. If I get lucky and the big one comes through, I'll shoot it. But I may learn something about that property. That's what I do a lot, like when I'm out of state and I'm hunting spots I don't know or I only got 5 days to hunt. I get aggressive quick. You know, I dive right into those spots and I start hunting, you know, because I got to make the most of my time.
So connection points, I think, you know, something to take away from that as a whole is I just envision like this phrase of connection points. So whether it's, you know, ridges or ditches or whatever, look for those connection points. And I think one strategy I like to use is, and it goes right along with that kind of, is just look bigger picture. So, you know, I think a lot of people get hyper focused on their property and if they're looking at it from an aerial map or whatever on an app, or, you know, they'll look at their property. I like to zoom out, you know, and look at that bigger picture, you know, and look at the bigger connection points. So my question to you is, how much scouting do you do like on an app, like aerial maps versus boots on the ground in the timber?
Probably 90% on a map.
Yeah.
And then pick those spots, and if things aren't what I think, then I'll move in. But I've done a lot of consulting for people just on a map. Like, you know, they don't want to pay to have you come out and walk their property and do all that, but, you know, they're willing to pay a certain amount to have you just give them really good pointers. And it's amazing how many people I have email me back and say, I don't know how you did that, but it's pretty darn amazing. What you told me was going to be there is there. You know, we're very close to it. You can't see everything, you know, if the property's been logged or something's been different. But, you know, and I think too, like I've learned something over the years that, you know, us trying to be deer managers or things like that, I feel like sometimes we can take a property and actually make it worse for big bucks. You think you're doing the right thing, and eventually it does make that cycle and it turns good. But that current deer herd situation, they're not used to it. And like, I don't know how you say it, but like I learned this years ago. I got a property to hunt and I got exclusive rights to it. And the lady allowed me to do food plots in it. And this was a farm that pretty much got run over all the time by people during hunting season. A lot of people hunted it, but every year somebody killed a big one out of there. I mean, a big one. And not just, you know, 150. I'm talking, you know, 70 plus type deer every year. And might have killed it on a gun drive or something like that. But those deer were in there. And you're like, why is those stupid deer in there? They know they get pressured. But it was a thick property. It didn't have a ton of deer on it. It was growed up weedy fields. Did have some crops out in the front and some good clover. But there was no food plots. No mineral licks, nobody even baited deer back then in Ohio where I hunted. Like, we just didn't bait deer. And every year somebody would kill one of these big hogs out of this property. Well, finally, I did some work for the lady, and I ended up getting the exclusive rights to the property. And, you know, I think I'm going to turn this into a big buck mecca. You know, and I go in there and I start carving food plots in certain spots and doing all this stuff. And, I mean, they were gone. The bigger bucks that were there vanished. I had all kinds of does and little bucks. And I'd get nighttime pictures of a mature deer, like that was in the area, but I never got the deer. He was never there. Like the neighbors ended up killing him or whatever. Like I just never got him there. Like they weren't used to what I did. And I started drawing more deer in and they didn't like it. Like they didn't like that social pressure of all those other deer. Now, during the rut, it was a little different. Like, I had a lot of does then, and I had big encounters with deer like that at that point, but it was in the thickest spot of the farms, and sometimes it was from rattling or they were pushing does, but they were never by themselves. So I learned, so I started backing off that and I started letting it grow back up, and it changed again. And those bigger bucks started being there and they would feed out in the clover. It was like I learned that some places can't handle it. Some can, some can't. So I think sometimes, when we go in and think we're going to do a big job of all this manipulation, sometimes you can make it better, but sometimes you can make it worse. I kind of dive in slow.
Yeah, so for somebody out there listening, like where do you draw that line? Is it something like you did where you go in and you test it and then you back off, or like how do you know and how do you regulate that? How much work is too much?
Yeah, well, and I think some of my problem was I was pretty, back then we didn't have cell cams.
Yeah.
I'm talking 2000, 2, 3, right in that range. We didn't have cell cams then. Going in and checking cards, you're just whatever. You want to go check your food plot out, see how it's growing, because you just weren't used to it. So it was really cool to have like this green looking lush plot. I'm going to just tiptoe in there and check it out. Well, all that stuff adds up for big deer. When typically like that big buck that was typically there, he could lay in that exact spot where you put that plot, and it was a growed up mustard field, and he could lay on the edge of the woods and never see a human till ever.
And now that's gone.
That's gone.
You took it away from him.
Yeah. So like it's totally changed his persona. But what I've noticed then is like farms that you do that and you keep after it. The deer that you grow there, they're used to it. It's different for them. You can grow those deer. That's why in Ohio, so many big deer get shot on bait because they grow up on it.
Yeah.
They're used to it. Like their mothers took them to the corn piles. So years ago, literally you could think, I'm going to go kill a big, I hear about people baiting deer, whatever. I'm going to go dump corn out. Them big bucks would run from that. Like they knew that was completely wrong. Well, then as it got more popular and popular and popular, the deer figured out it was normal to them because their mothers took them there as fawns, as button bucks, as spikes, whatever. They just grow up on it and it becomes a normal thing. They don't know that it's wrong unless they have a bad experience. Once in a while you get a deer that gets wounded or whatever and he starts catching on, I'm not going to a corn pile till dark. So it's deer adapt, like they're adaptive animals to their situation. And so like if you've got a farm that's always been food plotted and managed and things like it, doesn't hurt it. But it's those ones that sit behind that old rundown dairy farm that old Ethel owned forever and that people always killed a big buck on, and you just bought it and you think you're going to go in there and turn it into a, you got to tread lightly, I think, on there. If there's already big deer on it and they're there, tread lightly.
Yeah, and to that point, when we bought our property, it had never been managed, same thing. And it was pressured, pretty good too. But we didn't make any. In fact, you came in the first year we bought it. We walked the whole thing. And just last winter, and that's been 4 years ago, 5 years ago? This is the first time we made a change to that piece of property because we wanted to see what the heck was going on. Now, since Ben was talking about his experience, things have changed so much because of all the technology with the cameras and, people have done some research on, what does hinge cutting do and what, and that. But the bucks, like in our property, we're set up for probably, I would have to say that we're set up more so for the fawns and the does, and we're the hub that all the bucks want to come to, and we give them the elements they need to be there without pressure. But they don't hang out and grow up there. For the first 5 years, we haven't really noticed it, but we do have what we call our local, or whatever you want to call it, our core bucks. They always make their way back. So, and then now we got switchgrass. So we know now that we need more thermal cover because we lost 2 shooters last year because of no thermal. It was kind of a weird deal, but So yeah, it would be I would have wished we were thinking about this when we first bought the property and understood the property better. You know what I mean? We didn't really know anything about the property at all. Well, you had a good thermal over there on that Cedar Springs, because you got the cedar trees and some, natural grass and stuff over there. But then when them big winters come with the deep snow, that's no good anymore either. I don't know. This is really cool conversation. Opening up my mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as much as maybe you guys weren't thinking about it on that front end, like you still have, eased into it. Like you haven't made drastic changes even on that Cedar Springs side. Like a lot of that, you could have gone in and made a giant, food plot or put ag into that whole side. And, a lot of that is still that cedars and cover. And, the deer need that, just as much as they need food. You could put all the food in the world in there and not have any cover for them and they won't be there. JJ, what are your thoughts on this whole kind of concept?
I'm just taking it all in, thinking about all scenarios. I feel like when we talked about our property, when we were making changes and we first bought it, there was not a big, mature buck age class on the property, so it didn't really matter what we did. Sure. Because we weren't going to shoot anything for a couple of years anyway, so we kind of moved into the idea of making it better, and we are starting to see these bucks that they were 1 year old when we bought the property, and then we see them as a 2-year-old and 3-year-old. Now they're every day as a 4-year-old and every day as a 5-year-old, so they are growing up there on the property. Like about when we had Andy on the podcast a few weeks back, we talked about some of the stuff he's done and how bucks can, like we were talking about Wisconsin, a big buck could come from a big swamp or a big giant timber section into an area that I have little managed food plots and water holes and whatnot, cameras, and I've seen it to where this one buck in particular will come every single year, and he kind of gets shocked by the property when he walks onto it. He sees a camera and then it's gone for the rest of the year. Walks into a food plot. It's like he wants to be there. Then he sees all these changes that it's not normal for his.
Didn't feel good to him.
Home range, and he just comes, checks it out, and he's gone. So I could see how.
Then you got an 8.5-year-old buck that was shot that was there every single year.
Yeah, he grew up in.
He grew up there, yeah, but he kind of would disappear in the swamp too, though.
But yeah, there was this one buck. It was every year I'd get him one time, and he ended up being 9 years, and then he disappeared a couple of years ago. But it was you would walk through the property one time. If you saw a camera, if you went to a food plot, if anything happened, it was there he is.
I don't like this. I don't like this.
Because he didn't grow up with it. He didn't like it. He wanted that.
He just wanted that rough. It's what he was
He
used
just wanted that seclusion.
Yeah, secluded.
He didn't want any human element activity of any kind to stimulate him at all.
No, I mean, the red flash would basically, he would be gone.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's what happened.
Yeah.
So, I've got a piece in Illinois that I can hunt on, and a local guy out there he'll run cameras, help me run cameras, move them around, because it's a long distance for me. So he'll actually move some of my cameras, and I've had this lease for years. I call it the Nightwalker Farm. And he'll actually move some cameras for me, put batteries in them. And once in a while, he'll hang one of his regular cameras, especially on this one water hole spot we got. And it's easy for him to check. And he just likes to look at the pictures too, and it's fine. I don't care, whatever. But we just had a buck show up. And I'd never seen this buck this year yet, but we just literally got the cameras fired up probably 3.5, 4 weeks ago. And within a week, all of a sudden I got this monster 10 comes through to the water hole, and I get his picture on my Spartan, no flash, sends me the pictures. I get 4 pictures of the deer. And I get a picture at the same exact time I'd hit a video. And so I download the video, and during the video, Josh's camera flashes. And you could tell it took a picture and flashed, and it freaked that deer out. And that deer ain't been back.
We've seen that. Neighbor had a flash right on the property line. Had a deer. No, it wasn't a big one, but he was patterned, and we were seeing him. And all of a sudden, our camera caught the flash of his camera because must have just put it up because there was a nice heavy trail there, crossover. That was the last time that anything even showed up there.
Yeah. So years ago, when I killed the first booner, and I was using old flash cameras, but it didn't bother those deer. And I think what's happened, Like I think back then they didn't know, was that lightning but now I think as time went on, there's been so much more intrusion with people and cameras that I don't know if they know, they just know it's not right.
Well, they're smelling human with that too.
Yeah, that's true.
You know.
And so like, I don't know, I can't blame it all on that, but like, I just know that particular deer did not like it. Some deer does not bother. Like they'll take a flash all night long, like, you know, but that deer, he did not like that at all. So I don't know. Like, so it's just, every deer's different. It's just a matter of figuring out, but all I can say is typically the more caution you use, the better. And I feel like intrusion is the number one factor. I don't care if it's public land, private, whatever. You know, wherever there's the least amount of human pressure or intrusion is where those bucks are going to be, especially on public land. And sometimes that might be closer to the parking lot than you think. Because nowadays everybody thinks it's tough to go deep. You know, where years ago, when I first started hunting public land, not that many people went deep.
No.
They weren't serious bow hunters. They didn't go real deep. I'd get deep, and it was like some of the best hunting ever. Like, I never even wanted to talk about it, you know? And, but it's not like that now. It's different. Everybody is into this, you know, going deep thing and all that. So being light, going deep, you know, and now those deer have made switches and kind of changed things up, you know? And, like I talked to a guy at a show this year, and he was like, I just hunt public land. And I was like, man, no problem. It's great for you, whatever. And I said, how have you done? He goes, well, I ain't killed a buck for 5 years. And I'm like thinking to myself, you know, but he's bragging how like he's hunting public ground. That it meant more to him that he could say he hunted public land than it actually meant to kill a buck.
To kill a buck, yeah.
And like
there was kind of a craze that went on there for a while. It's kind of simmered down a little bit, but it's like, oh, I shot at public land, you know. It's like, and that's how I cut my teeth, was public land. Whitewater State Park in down here in southeast Minnesota. Let me tell you, man, it's a big area and it is tough hunting. But we didn't know anything compared to what we know today. I guarantee you, well, I don't want to say guarantee, I'm extremely confident I could go in there and shoot a deer without an issue.
But like this kid anyways, so I told him then at the show I was like, well, don't you get tired of putting all that effort in and not killing a deer? I said, or don't you think you should do something different? You know, if you haven't encountered even a mature deer that you wanted to shoot yet. And I was like, you know, maybe. And he said, well, what would you do? You know, like, and I said, well, I'd be looking in a different spot. If you want to stick to public, that's fine. But I would be thinking different on how you're hunting it. And so he actually pulled up his phone and he kind of showed me, and I pointed out a few spots where I would look. And he actually messaged me at the end of the season, and he said, I saw more big deer this year than I've ever seen in my life. I didn't get one. He goes, but I was as close to shooting a shooter. He goes, I at least drew my bow twice this year.
He was hunting.
And I was hunting.
Yeah.
It felt like I was in the game. And he goes, I was 200 yards from the parking lot.
Isn't that funny?
You know, I said, listen, things are changing. Like, you have to adjust with, you know, how things.
Look at how many deer we shot out at, we'll call it our friend's house before we bought the property. I was hunted all the time. There's people out there, we had no control over it, and they was hunted all the time, and we figured out a way to hunt around the people. And we shot deer up on that thing. Some of the biggest deer were shot. Well, Curly was shot there. You know, and it's because of understanding the human's behavior. We understood what the deer were doing and weren't doing based off of what they were doing. And that's what allowed us to become more successful. And that's exactly what you just basically, you know, gave the secret to everybody out there listening.
It's kind of like, you ever seen the movie World War Z with Brad Pitt?
I just saw the one where they were all climbing a wall or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was like World War Z. It was back in like, I think this movie was like 2012, but it was about like it was kind of like a thing like COVID, but it turned people into zombies.
Zombies, yeah.
Whatever, and he had to find the cure. But this one infectious disease doctor was talking about how like Mother Nature is a serial killer, and like I just watched this the other day, and it like kind of hit me, and it's like, bucks are almost the same way. Like the way it's like they have all these systems of how they do things and whatever, but it's almost like they want to be caught. Like they give you a weakness somewhere. Like, but you have to figure out what that weakness is, and sometimes it's right under your nose. Like you just have to find it, and every buck has one. Some can be a calling to deer, some can be a scrape, some can be a food source. Some can be girls, some can be they know that, like some of it, like I had a deer once, I knew his weakness was he wanted to be alone. He didn't want to be around any other deer. And he lived on the farm in the spot where no other deer ever wanted to be. Like the most horrible, like you would think, like I'm stupid for sitting here. I can't even sit here. It's so dumb. Like this is asinine.
That's a lot of my stands.
Like it was an open soft maple woods, young reverted soft maple, completely open, no browse. It was kind of wet. I mean, you'd sit there for hours and never see anything, not even squirrels, but that sucker lived in there. I never did kill him, but that deer taught me a lot. Like that's where I'd get his picture in the daylight. He'd be in there, but I could never get in there to him. Like, and this was back in the day too, but like it taught me, like he wanted that complete seclusion, and it was the one place on the farm that no other deer. He just didn't like deer.
No.
He didn't like other deer, period. Like it just, I don't know what it was. He could be feeding in a field in the summer, and if another buck walked out, he'd walk away. Didn't matter if it was a little buck, doe, didn't matter. Back in the timber you go, he's gone.
There's deer out there like that had these just beautiful, beautiful deer, big racks, everything else, and you think they just beat the crap out of everybody and take over. They don't want nothing to do with it. We've had films of different hunts like that, where this particular buck just that's not his thing.
And then you get some 8-point that walks out with 2x4 beams and scores 120, and every deer's scared of it.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, what was you guys had a deer like that on the Whitetails from Scratch property here. When you first got it, what deer was that?
Oh, that was blind
10.
10.
Oh, yeah.
Trying to get him down.
Yeah. Yeah, we're getting into that time frame here in the season where, the early season is kind of gone now. Deer are off those patterns, and you have to put yourself in those opportunity spots. How, Ben or JJ, I guess maybe let's start with you on this. How much do you rely on your cameras right now this time of year during the seeking phase? Do you rely on them a lot, or have you kind of thrown them out the window, or is it a mixture?
Well, I think, obviously the cell camera change in technology has shifted what everybody does. So real-time information's, right at your fingertips right now. But I feel like just as valuable as looking back to previous years at like the exact same time in previous years and what the bucks are doing. So just like a repeatable pattern. That's how I killed Beamer. Like every year I just knew he would show up to the property late October, and I just would drive up there, and that was the week I would hunt, because he would just start doing hot laps. All the way up until he was 8 years old. He showed up and shot him October 28th. It was just like he wasn't on the property like the whole year, and then it was like you just knew he was coming pre-rut, and you got your traps all set, and you just wait for him, so that had nothing to do really with like real-time information. It was always the previous years of experiences and interactions with that buck. So I guess looking back is equally, if not more valuable than just trying to, like, even your hunt breakdown this year with swoops. Like, you had intel. We're talking about last year's hunt. You have intel, but you're trying to think ahead. So you didn't go with intel. You went with your gut, and you tried to get ahead of them, and that's how you ended up shooting that buck. So, just thinking back and trying to think ahead, like they're trying to figure out their next step is probably more important than trying to figure out, I got a picture, I'm going to try to move on it and try to, get kind of behind the eight ball, I guess, or however you say that. So I guess that's my little take on this little window, looking back at intel, trying to get ahead of it this year.
And, when you talk about Beamer, he was that one that Ben was talking about. He showed up, dude, every deer was gone. I mean, that guy was a beast. Yeah. Just a just a bruiser, he was a fighter. That's just a comment. But anyway, as far as our property goes, I do it a little bit differently. I'm not aggressive. I don't have the burn like I did way back in the day where I would the things I used to do are just like Ben's talked about, can be just stupid. You just go ramble. I don't do that no more. I just don't care to do that anymore. I care to see what's happening from a big picture perspective. So I'm looking at it differently. So I'm saying to myself, okay, I want this deer in here. I'm using my intel. Basically, JJ, we all discuss this as a family, so we're talking about it every day during the hunting season. But we figure out, what are they doing? What are they doing? What are they doing? What am I not going to do to get him to leave is my number one thing that I think of. What am I not going to do to blow this deer out here is the number one thing that I look at. Now, that's not a good way to hunt if you're looking to kill a bunch of big bucks all the time. You know what I mean? But it's more important to me to just have that animal in there and get a chance at him. And then when it starts getting late in the season and I know my windows are closing, I look at those elements, the wind, the barometer, the moons, the this, the that. And when I get them perfect days, I'm out there hunting it hard, but I'm always giving that deer the win until the end of the year. And that's when I go, you know what? I got to trust my hunting skills here. If I really want to kill this deer, I got to trust my hunting skills and I got to give him the wind a little bit. Who cares? There's only a few days left or whatever it might be, a week, and see if I can get him. And that's what's paid off for me. So when I did get aggressive, that's when I get my payoff. Now, last year, it went the opposite. But I gave this deer the shooter that I talked to you about. I gave him the wind every time. And every time I'd sit the stand, he'd be at the other one. And we played a chess match all year long. And we'll have a video on this. It's Peyton. Yeah. We'll talk about him. And I had that deer dialed in so good. But every time I gave him the win, he just outsmarted me. So right at the very end of the year, you know what? That's it. I'm going in there where I shouldn't go. And guess where he showed up? The other spot where I was giving him the advantage, or wasn't giving him, you know what I'm talking about. The win was in his favor, not in my favor. Right. So, anyway, long story short, I just play it really cool. But I like to enjoy the big picture. I like to enjoy seeing the deer and creating the hunting environment. That's kind of what's driving me right now. I don't have to shooting. Now this year we got to get rid of some does, so I'll take a few does. But other than that and a turkey, the turkeys are getting sick too. But he died because we had too much for him to chase in there, and the wrong weather front came in, and he was wore down. It wasn't just him. There was two of them that died. So it was the perfect storm. The wrong weather came in. They were wore down because we created this freaking just stupid property with all the deer and all that. And, we got to thin that out. That can be too much for a deer. That can backfire on you too.
He was having a stroke from chasing all those girls.
Well, he didn't have an ounce of fat on his body.
Yeah. That's weird. He had too much breeding to do.
He had way too much, but it was over. It was like January, but he wore himself down so hard. And what was he, 6.5 years old, right? Mm-hmm. So he didn't make 7.5. And then the other one was 5.5, and same thing with him. Exposure. Now, it was the weather that killed him. Don't get me wrong. It was a bad scenario. A lot of deer died in Minnesota last year. A lot of deer, a lot of bucks that were wore down died last year. So if you're looking for them and you don't show up,
that super, super cold spell.
Yeah, but it had the moisture in it. Yeah. So when you get that super, super cold spell and the moisture's in it and the trees all turn white, it penetrates inside their hide. They don't have the fat layer, and they just die of exposure. It's just
brutal.
It's brutal.
I don't know how they survive half the time anyways. Some of the cold they deal with in extreme conditions. Whitetails live a rough life. They really do.
Unbelievably
tough. Fighting and people, I don't think people realize just how whitetail bucks, they're the most aggressive deer species.
Well, we talked about that. So we talked about decoying, and behavior and stuff like that. And, out in Kansas, there's a lot of decoying and this and that. I never really use a decoy, but the one that I did use, we bought him, we call him Dave because it's a Dave Smith decoy. And it's big, it's cumbersome, but dude, you put it in, if you ever hunt by this decoy or put this decoy out by your stand for a decoy hunt, you're just sitting there for hours and all of a sudden you just kind of look and it catches you. It's like, there's a deer there. And then you oh, that's my decoy. That's how good they look. I mean, they're stupid good looking. So I put this out at the bat blind, and this deer was, 12 yards away, or the decoy, I mean. And deer comes walking into him. He sees it, and the power blew my mind. He came up to this big, heavy decoy, busted the antler, knocked the decoy down, had a metal stand, bent that to crap, and it happened in a split second. And it was just, whoa, and he was gone. And then I got to thinking, I've always thought about if a deer was sitting there and I had to cut his throat or whatever, I could grab his rack. Oh, no. No, don't even think about it. That deer can kill you in an instant. Think about a 6-inch tine piercing you in a nanosecond almost, Don't mess with them. They are strong animals.
Yeah, unbelievably resilient animals for sure. But circling back and to wrap this thing up, Ben, you gave a lot of strategies there. Seeking phase, one last final piece of advice for somebody going out there hunting tomorrow. What is it?
Like during the seeking phase?
Yeah.
Well, seeking phase, you better have your black rack and your extinguisher in your pocket. I'm not saying that just because this is where we're at, but that's really, if you see a deer at a distance, they're most likely going to react. If it's a deer you want to try to get a crack at, they're probably going to react to it. But I like to, if I'm hunting properties or hunting a deer I don't know and I'm just hunting, like I'm out of state and I'm just grinding like Iowa or Kansas trying to kill a really good deer, then I'm trying to set myself up where I think I'm going to see the most deer, have the most opportunities to put myself in a position to kill a deer, whether it's, some of these contours that I talk about where the deer move. Food sources are important that time of year, but not as important. It's typically that's the time to dive in the timber a little bit or those innards of your farm and get aggressive a little bit and see what you can come up with, because you have the opportunity at that point to burn things up a little bit, and it's not going to affect as much as it would if it was super early season or late season, and don't rely on your cameras all the time. Cameras help, but you can get caught up so much in just watching your cameras at that time of year that doesn't, I think you can hurt yourself too.
Mike, what do you got? One piece of advice, seeking phase.
Seeking phase, it's very similar to what Ben has to say. Once again, I'm a communicator, so have that stuff available, but don't just, go crazy and calling. Deer are getting call shy. Deer are getting smarter, and especially a big buck. What you really need to focus on is the body language and understanding how to play that specific deer. You know what I mean? Do as little as you can and as much as you need to, but start out slow, add more, but figure out what do you need to do to turn that deer inside out. That's the key to the whole thing to me when it comes to communicating.
JJ?
Well, it's time to get into some of our favorite spots of the year that we've been waiting to jump into. Yeah, be aggressive. If they're preset and you already got your access trails and everything, wait for the right conditions, cold fronts, right wind direction, and dive in and put some good stand time in. If it's not set, like Ben said, get aggressive, dive in. You're not going to mess as much stuff up right now as you will early season or late season when deer are more sensitive. So be aggressive, have fun. It's the best time of the year. Being straight.
All good stuff. I'll just wrap that up with, I would say stay positive. Don't get down. It's the best time of year and lots can change in a hurry. Like from day to day. It can change, and you could be sitting there seeing no deer and boom, the buck of a lifetime shows up.
The harder you work, the luckier you will get.
That's a fact. You make your luck.
There you go. Well, I know we promised a giveaway. Let's go with phase out, tag out. So if you want to get in to win a free phase 5-pack, message us on social media, YouTube, comment, send us an email, call Clary on the phone, phase out, tag out, to get in on the free Phase 5 pack. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe, download the free Deer Society app. Lots of great hunt breakdowns still pumping out. So guys, thanks for listening. It's the best time of year. Good luck out there in the woods, and we look forward to seeing your pictures.
Check out whitetailledge.com.
Check out whitetailledge.com. Ben Rising. I'm sure he's posted $4 down by now.
Bye now. All our sponsors here at Deer Society are partners whose equipment we know we can trust are going to make you more successful and have a better experience in the field. Products like Illusion Systems, maker of the Black Rack, the Extinguisher, and the Phase Body Odor System. Tacticam, Reveal Cell Cameras, 10-Point Crossbows, Onyx Maps, Osseo Gear, Hooyman, and Big Frig.